life shine. You gotta be working to get the woman and the wine. Keep the beat and get your hands in the air. Shuffle the beat cause it's an African affair. To go for the park and our home at St. George's. We're bringing the silverware back on the gorgeous. That's the way of the warrior. That's the way of the warrior. That's the way of the warrior. That's the everyday warrior.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Gino Spot, and of course here with Mike Van Vuuren tonight. Fires. We are doing the Fires version of Gino Spot tonight, which is firing on all cylinders. And we have a special guest tonight as well, which is to do with fish, which is an ichthyologist, which is going to be very interesting. We're going to chat to him about fish stocks and what's going on, because I know fish is your thing as well. You like
very
fish.
Much so, very much.
Like a bit of fried fish.
I like catching them and releasing them.
Catching them and releasing. Well, we're gonna speak about that when we get to Bruce. But just as a little bit of an intro, welcome to Gino Spot. Lovely to have you here tonight with us. And get yourself a drink. Put your feet up, and you can have some great, interesting conversation and learn something new tonight. Just as an intro, our dams, I believe, are around about 40%.
48 or so.
48 already.
Do you believe it?
I know a couple of them are under Churchill's like really full already, which is great. And but it's the big ones. It's in Mpofu, I think it's in Kuche and in Mpofu that have got to fill up. And
well, I think
that's
680 odd days of water or 640 days of water.
Oh, that's good.
It's better than 3 days.
That's better. It's better than day zero.
At least there's something coming out the tap when you open it.
And our tanks are full as well, which is also like I said. I've got lots of days of water coming here too. Then also a couple of special announcements. One is the Harley Davidson fans. If you're into Harleys, there is Fernando Angeleri, who is a Harley guy and is a muso. And he has a pub called Fernando's Hideout. That's in Colleen Glen, 92 Door Road. We're going to have the Harley Davidson Book Club get together, and this is probably the biggest. It's the biggest grouping of Harleys that they've had in PE. About 200 bikes are going to be there. That is Saturday. This coming Saturday. So if you've got a chance, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they're going to be starting and they're going to be ending at about 10. And it's they're coming from East London. They're coming from George and Eisner Plate, all the Harley guys. And Fernando is hosting them.
Book club or bike club?
A book club, I believe. But you know what the book club is all about. It's like the women with their book club as well. They always, the wives always say, "Oh, the book club is." But then it's all about drinking.
To bed.
It's exactly going to help them to bed later. So the Harley Davidson Book Club, don't miss out if you're interested, especially if you're into bikes. Don't forget about it. And then also the show, the Center Stage show that's coming soon. We are doing that. It's on the 3rd, 4th, and 5th of August, and then we've added an extra. So check it out, the Sensational Six, kindly sponsored by Fitch and Leeds and Sovereign, and also Hunters has also jumped on as well for the live shows too, which is great fun. You can check out our new band. We got the guys in there. It's, where's that picture, Gary? Put it in again. I wanted to show these guys. Look at this amazing band. We got Ronnie van Jaarsveld on bass, his pink bass.
I see, yeah.
I see, and our new members, of course, Stephen Herter on guitar on the right hand side, the two girls, Kaylin and Tiffany, and then Tara, Wayne, myself, Tuba and Kanya Matumela on keyboards. He's a stalwart of center stage. And so New Look Band, we've got an amazing show. The Sensational 60s is incredible. We have also got we've got a huge PA system. We've got the lighting going. We are back to full strength with center stage, which is I've been waiting for this since the bloody plague. You know.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be sold out as per normal.
It should be, and we sold out the two nights already. I think it's the Thursday. We still have tickets, and we still have the 8th, which we've just opened as an extra show as well, because that's a public holiday, the 8th of August.
Yes.
So the 9th is actually the holiday, so you can come to the show before and you can sleep late on the 9th. Isn't that cool? Yes,
since you're punting your shows, can
yes, your show as well. Yes,
punt our show, Bruce. We won't be long. We've got a fantastic cricket show on Thursday night at Old Grey.
Yeah,
I've purposely withheld 2 tickets. We've got the guys attending the show: Barry Richards, Graham Pollock, Garth LaRue, Stephen Jeffries, Adrian Caper, Henny LaRue, the rugby player, Scott Berger. We've got Henry Fotheringham, Hugh Page, Kevin Kerr, Kenny McEwen, Dave Callahan, Mark Rushmere. There's a horde of guys.
I'm surprised you can remember all the names.
Well, I've obviously forgotten a lot of the names. Carl Barmister's there. I mean, the guy was in the show.
Oh, that's great. Yes.
Trevor Quirky's there.
Wow. Okay.
I've kept 2 tickets back. The rest, it's chock-a-block. So if anybody's interested in the 2 tickets, they can send a message there and come and enjoy it. It's $3.50, includes a 3-course meal and lots of laughter.
And plenty stories.
Yeah, plenty of stories. And believe me, you'll laugh.
Okay. Sure. Fantastic. And okay, so also thank you to our sponsors for Gino Spa, and then of course Fitch and Leeds, who are helping us, and Sovereign, who are helping us live as well. And we have Hunters on the boiler as well. That's great for a bit of extra to drink. So I think it's almost time then. Fires, cheers to you.
Cheers, old chap.
Get yourselves a drink, and we're going to get our guest on straight away. Let's get our intro going.
Welcome to the show. Now it's your time to shine. We're gonna have a lekker chat tonight. Another good time.
Have a good time.
Bruce
Man. Hello, Bruce. Welcome to Gino's Spot.
Nice to have you on board.
Great.
Good to have you on board.
Yeah, I believe that you're sitting in Claremont.
Claremont, yeah, in the Eastern Cape, not Claremont in the Western Cape.
Yes, a Claremont.
Are you on the island, Bruce?
No, we're on the eastern side. So
on the eastern
side. Field farm, yeah.
Is that like the East Rand of Claremont?
Something like that, yeah. But it's the better side.
See, not like the bluff of Claremont.
I believe there are quite a few ichthyologists staying there.
Yes, there are a whole fleet of us down here, or a shoal, should I say, would be more.
Yeah, that's very well put.
A shoal of ichthyologists.
All retired ichthyologists.
Not all of them, no. Some of them are still active. Yeah, there are people like Paul Cowley, Warren Potts, our old professor, Tom Hecht, to name but a few. There are a few of us down here.
Gee whiz.
But what's the reason for that all of you guys are gathering there? Is there some sort of bait there?
We've got secrets, Fishermen don't tell.
Clearly.
Is it actually a spot where you can research, or is it? I mean, why the attraction?
It's just such a beautiful spot. It's got an incredible double-mouth estuary system, probably the most studied estuary in South Africa, I think, after St. Lucia. And it's close. It's close to Rhodes University in Grahamstown, where we studied. So
yes.
A lot of my studies when I was at Rhodes, the weekends I'd come down to Claremont and fish on the coast here. So I got to know it and got to love it. So when it came for time for looking for a place to retire, this was top of the list. So we're very lucky.
Gee whiz.
Interestingly enough, I know Claremont quite well. We've got a very good friend there. And I found that the water or the river between the island and the East London side of Claremont to be incredibly sterile. I've fished there and I've caught nothing. Yet you go to the other side where you are, and 90% of the time you catch something.
Yeah,
why would that be, do you think?
very different systems, quite surprisingly. So the eastern side, I've still got to get used to this north and south as I had in Natal, when the coast lies north and south. Yeah, it lies east and west. So I'm still getting my head around it. But on the eastern side, the estuary is smaller. It's about 4 k's long, but it's got a much bigger catchment area. So when there is rainfall in the catchment, the system opens up. And so you get fish leaving the system, fish coming into the system. So it tends to be more productive. It's got a higher turnover. Whereas on the western side, it's 11 kilometers long. So it's a much bigger estuary, but it's got a smaller catchment. So the mouth stays closed for much longer. It's been closed now for 9 years, I believe. It hasn't opened. And there's some big cob and big learies or garrick in the system that are desperate to get out and go and spawn. But it's really, really full now. So we're actually hoping on the next big rain or big spring tide where we have a big swell, it's actually going to open. So we hope.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
Is it raining down there as well? You're getting lots of water coming down the river.
We've had a very good season. Yeah, the countryside is looking magnificent, and it's been very dry here for a long time. So I think when I came down, I must have brought the rain with me from Natal, because it's been wet there.
So how long have you been at Claremont, Bruce?
We moved down here in March. This
year. Okay, so it's very recent.
Just a couple of months. Still getting used to the Eastern Cape.
Getting used to the locals. But it sounds like all of them are into fish. It's great that all of you are together in that spot. You must get the local pub must be just talking about fish research all the time.
And Bruce, tell me, although you've retired, are you still actively involved?
Absolutely. I guess I resigned and took early retirement.
I must say you look young.
I've got a few years in me still.
Yes.
I think I'm a refugee from KZN. Things just got chaotic there with the riots and the looting and the floods and what have you. And it was also time for me. So I am working as a sort of research associate, still linked to my organization in Durban, the Oceanographic Research Institute, but also linked to Rhodes University as a research associate. So I'm going to sort of do a little bit of consulting and just pick and choose what makes my wheels spin and what I get interested in.
And if I may ask, then how does it work? Does the university give you a project, or do you go to them and say, I propose that we do this project? Either way. Both of those are options, yeah. And is there anything specific that you're working on at the moment? I've got very interested in the telemetry work. So this is tracking animals using acoustic tags. A lot of receivers now, probably close on 300 acoustic receivers in the sea and in our estuaries, all the way from Cape Town all the way up into Mozambique. We're tagging fish and sharks and rays with these acoustic tags, mostly internally, and then tracking their movements. And I've run the ReTagging Project now for probably 20 years as the sort of senior manager. And when you tag a fish with a conventional spaghetti tag, we call it, that little plastic external tag. The yellow one or the orange one. Yeah. You know where the fish is when you tag it, and you know where it is if it ever gets recaptured. But you've got no idea what it's done in between. So if you tag the fish at Kleinemünde and you catch it at Kleinemünde in 10 years' time, you automatically think, well, it's stayed here the whole time. Yes. It could have gone to Timbuktu 10 times and come back again. You don't know. And so this acoustic telemetry is really filling in that gap in our knowledge, and it's absolutely fascinating. We've done some work on
how does it work?
How does it work?
So basically, it's similar to the conventional tagging. You catch the fish. And we use a big bath or a plastic stretcher that's full of seawater, and we put the fish into that, turn it upside down, which calms it down. We make a very small incision in the abdominal cavity, into the coelomic cavity, and we insert a tag. It's about the size, if you can see my finger, sort of just the top of my pinky, like a AAA battery. That's the sort of size.
Yes.
It's a sealed tag, and that emits a unique pulse, a ping, if you like. And you set it, if it pings every 45 seconds, the battery in the tag can last much longer. If you make it ping more regularly, it lasts a much shorter time. That ping can be detected by an underwater hydrophone, which is a listening station, which we basically put down using a piece of railway line and a rope attached to it and a buoy. Just about a 2-meter stretch of rope, and you attach the hydrophone, and it just sits there and listens for pings. So any pinging that comes past it, it hears it. It's got a data logger. It records that unique ping, the time, the date that it went past. And then we download those once a year. The battery on the hydrophone lasts about a year. So we normally dive on them, take them out, download, and then put a new one down with a new battery. So it's a continuous sort of permanent station that's listening. And so with all our hydrophones up and down the coast, we're getting phenomenal information on the movements of our fish up and down. It's fantastic.
How far does it actually reach that ping?
So it depends on the current, the water quality, and the topography. So if it's nice and flat and the water's clean and still, it can probably hear within a radius of 500 meters of the hydrophone. But normally we work on about 300 meters radius of the hydrophone. So if the fish or shark or ray swims within that radius, it'll be detected.
Yeah.
And you say
been fascinating.
And you say you're diving on them, obviously to make sure that the device is in order, and so on. So I imagine they're all inshore species.
Mostly inshore, but these guys are so clever now. They've also come up with a system which is called an acoustic release system. So we can put them into very deep water, and then you just use the GPS coordinate and you go above it with a boat, and you talk to it with a little hydrophone, and you say, okay, we hear release, ping, and you hit the button, and the whole contraption unscrews itself and it floats up to the top. So then you've got all the data. It's a system that's been developed by the Canadians, a company called BEMCO. Yeah.
Okay.
Is there a question?
No, just I mean, so you have to put quite a lot of these things around, and are there any sort of surprising results that you've had from these things? I mean, with fish going long distances and
Timbuktu, 10 times.
No, it's been absolutely incredible. I think the greatest surprise for us was a project that I worked on with my colleague Ryan Daly up at Ori, and he'd been tagging giant kingfish in southern Mozambique for a number of years. And from the Ori tagging data, we thought that giant kingfish were kind of fairly resident and stayed in an area, and that's where they live. But from the acoustic tagging data, we realized that these things go all the way up to southern Mozambique every year to spawn. So all the South African giant kingfish population actually swim all the way up into southern Mozambique to go and spawn every year. We know exactly where the spawning aggregation area is, where they go to, and they spawn between November, December, January, those 3 months over summer, and they spawn on the full moon. And we know exactly what time of the day they come in, spawn, what time they disperse again. And some of these fish, incredibly, will do that twice in one season. So they'll come up in November, they'll spawn, and then swim all the way back to their posi, and then decide, I need some more of that, and they swim all the way back again. It's incredible. Traveling huge distances. And from our work in South Africa, we've got the longest migrations of giant kingfish recorded anywhere in the world. Most of the research elsewhere has been done on sort of island systems, like in the Seychelles and Hawaii, where you've got an atoll and the fish stay around that sort of atoll. But with our coastline, because it's a sort of long coastline and not a sort of surrounded by deep water, these fish are moving up and down the coast. So it's that for me has been one of the most incredible and fascinating results. But they keep coming in quick and fast as we work on new species.
Well, how the hell do they know that it's a full moon?
Yeah, it's incredible, nature. But now, Bruce,
nature's incredible.
Interestingly enough, I tagged quite avidly for ORI, and I used to work through Eleanor Bullen.
Yes.
Is Eleanor still there, by the way, or is she retired?
She left about 10, 11 years ago now. So she was there from 1984. She started. That's when the project started, and she was there for, it must have been close to 20, 25 years, I think.
She was part of the furniture.
Yeah, she retired, and our next tagging officer was Stuart Dunlop.
Yes, that's about the time I got out of it.
Yeah, Stuart ran the project for a couple of years, and then he moved on to other pastures. He's managing a game ranch up in the I think Eastern Cape, Mpumalanga area now, and Gareth Jordan has taken over as our tagging officer in 2018. So we've got some nice gears and some youngsters and good skills coming in. So
good. Now, interestingly enough, the reason I raised that, we used to go to Bazaruta every year for about 4 or 5, maybe 6 years in the 90s. And on one particular trip, I tagged a kingfish, quite a big kingfish, off the south point of Bazaruta. And I got a stinking letter from Eleanor, basically telling me that she didn't want me to tag or didn't want us tagging fish in Mozambique. I never pursued it or asked her what the problem was. I merely assumed it was because it was outside of South African waters. Yeah. But why do you think she would have sent me the stinking letter about tagging kingfish off Bazaruta?
Yeah, at that stage, there were quite sensitive relations between the governments of South Africa and
I see.
So it's a political issue. At the moment, we are allowed to tag game fish, pelagic game fish that move distances in Mozambique waters. So our ReTaggers can do what you did and tag a kingfish in Mozambique if they want to. But in Namibia, we were also using the ReTagging project there from the start. But in the early 1990s, the Namibian Fisheries Institute started their own tagging project, and they didn't want the two projects mixing for obvious reasons. The tags go to the wrong place and the information gets lost. So they asked us to stop our taggers tagging in Namibia, which we have done and continue to do so now. So that's the reason.
Yeah. Okay. And interestingly enough, you've raised the point about the kingfish. So are you suggesting that the giant kingfish actually live in South African waters and migrate to Mozambique?
Exactly. That's not what I'm suggesting. That's what we found out.
Yes, he was.
I would never have thought that.
They have home ranges, we call them, areas that they live in. And it makes sense to have a home range because you kind of learn your endow. You know where you live.
Yes.
You know where the nice currents are. You know where the feeding hotspots are. You know where the predators come from. So you can make a better life for yourself in an area that you know. It's like having your place on the planet. And they live in those areas. They're quite big, some of them. They can be up to 60 kilometers of coastline that they patrol up and down in. But that's their kind of area that they live. But every year, if it's a mature adult and he gets the calling, it's time to move. And they'll move all the way up to go and spawn. So it's amazing.
So without giving away the crown jewels, what would their southernmost reach be? The Transkei?
Southernmost reach is a Transkei. Sort of they don't, the big adults don't go very much further south of Port St. John's. You do get the youngsters, the young kingfish in some of the estuaries further south, probably all the way down to about the Kai. But it's starting to get cold for kingfish there.
Well, there's another great point that you raised. Is water temperature changing, or has it changed over time?
Well, no, that's a whole debate on its own. Is
contentious issues.
Sure. That would appear to be the case.
Absolutely no doubt about it.
It would appear to be the case.
Around the world, with changing seawater temperatures warming most of the time, we're seeing changes in distribution of certain species. So even on our very own coastline, some of the anglers who are listening tonight will know the catface rockcod, for example, is a common rockcod species, but it's more a tropical animal, and you get it down probably normally as far as this part of the world, down to sort of Kleinamunda would be as far south as it would go. But we've recently had them caught or in the De Hoop Marine Protected Area, right down in the Western Cape.
Cape Town.
Wow.
Much further south. And so similar things are happening. We're getting these distribution ranges increasing further south. So I'm hoping that in the next couple of years I'll be able to catch giant kingfish and speckled snapper and all my natal species in my backyard.
Let's hope so.
Oh my word! I hope it doesn't get too warm. And the problem is in the summers. I mean, it's just going to be so dry. So I don't know. And I mean, I love hearing these stories about fish. Which fish do you actually prefer to tag? I mean, and how do you go about it? I mean, which species do you go for? Do you go to where they pull in something? You hear about it? Have you got a network or something that you hear these guys are putting in fish?
So the ReTagging Project has been going for 38 years now. It was the brainchild of Rudy van der Elst, and I think a lot of anglers have probably heard of Rudy's book on common sea fishes. So he's been one of the doyens of ichthyology in South Africa.
Yeah,
and he started this concept, and the idea was to get anglers interested, conservation conscious anglers, to join a program where they can contribute to science and learning about our marine fish species. So it's what's called a citizen science project, and we've now got over 7,000 members that have joined the tagging project. When you join, you pay a sort of once-off membership fee of 500 Rand now, that you get a tagging kit, and in that kit you've got applicators, you've got tags, you get a little memory stick with videos on it that explain to you exactly how to do it, and then you can go off and tag fish on your own. We've got a priority species list that we ask fishermen to focus on, so we don't want them to tag fish that are very abundant and of less interest to science. So we focus on the fish that we really need either movement information or growth information or population dynamics information on, and try and get our anglers to focus on those species. What are those? They catch a fish, they'll tag it, release it, and then send that information into ORI. We've got a big database where our data captures record it all, and it sits there until such time as that fish ever gets recaptured. Then we send a letter to the person who tagged it and the person who recaptured it, telling them the story of that fish, where it was tagged, how big it was when it tagged, how far it swam, how much it's grown, all that kind of information, which is fascinating to anglers. And over time, we've now got over 350,000 fish tagged in South African waters, which is phenomenal. Of those, 23,000 fish have been recaptured of over 200 species. So there's an absolute mine of information that we've learned from this project, and anglers themselves have really contributed to improving our knowledge, and this knowledge goes to improving the management of the species and ultimately their conservation. So it's really been a fantastic project.
I presume you're one of them, Mike.
No, interestingly enough, you might remember you used to distribute a newsletter from ORI.
Yes.
And I kept one dating back to about 1998 or 99, and I actually looked at it today just to make sure my facts were straight.
All right.
And a yellowtail... No, but listen, the facts are the facts. A yellowtail tagged on Bird Island in plus minus 1998 and recaptured, I think, 14 months later on the south coast of Natal, had grown 200 millimeters in that, I think it was a 13-month period. And conversely, or by contrast, a mussel cracker that I caught at Cape Recife, and it was the fish was recaptured at Flat Rocks, which is a distance of about 1 kilometer.
Yeah.
Yes.
In a period 5 years later,
5 years.
has only grown 10 or 20 millimeters. But obviously it had fattened up. But I mean, that's the type of fascinating info.
Yeah.
That's exactly the type of information that we learning from the tagging program. So to talk about yellowtail, highly nomadic species, very, very mobile. They move over the ocean, very fast growing. They grow like anything. And the population of yellowtail is actually sound. They're one of those species that has managed to survive, even though there's heavy fishing pressure on them because of their life history. Whereas the other one, the black mussel cracker, is a much slower growing animal. They live for up to 45 years. I mean, they live for a long time, nearly as long as human beings. And they tend to be really resident. So they live on a reef in a very small home range. So they very quickly depleted. So, you know, the one has been severely overfished and the other is fine. So those are the types of things that we can learn from this type of science.
Yeah. But now, just to pick up on the yellowtail issue, why is it then that some years you go to Belompo, where we've caught a lot of yellowtail off the rocks, and you really struggle to get them? And then you go to the next year, and I've seen catches of 80, 90 a day off the rocks. But the year before, and after spending a lot of time there, you hardly catch a yellowtail. And the conditions seem to be the same. What would you put that down to?
Yeah. Marco, there can be a whole lot of reasons, but the first thing I would say is that currents change along our coastline the whole time. So although we've got this big, warm Agulhas current moving down the east coast of South Africa, it's like a big river, 100 kilometers wide of warm tropical water coming down the coastline.
Yes.
That current actually meanders. It's like if you watch a stream, how our river sort of moves back over backwards, so it meanders, and the wind has a huge effect on that current. You probably know from the Eastern Cape anyway, when the easterly blows for 2 or 3 days, the water gets cold, whereas
especially on the open side. Correct.
It warms up. So basically, happening there, very simplistically, as I understand it, is that when the easterly blows in the southern hemisphere, you have Coriolis forces, which is the spinning of the earth. Return towards the sun.
Yeah.
Coriolis forces in the southern hemisphere deflect water to the left. So when the wind is blowing easterly, the current warmer water moves further offshore, and you get cold, deep water coming in to take its place. So you get upwelling.
Unbelievable.
When you have the southwesterly blowing, water's deflected to the left. So you get that warm current water coming in. It cleans up, it warms up, and you have downwelling, which pushes the thermocline deeper off the shelf. So that's the first answer to your question, is that there's great variability in water temperature and current. The second thing, I think it probably has a lot to do with the prey that the yellowtail are feeding on. They tend to come up at the similar time of year to the sardines. So they're feeding on sardines, and that might be, those are very, very much hit and miss, again, because of water temperatures and currents. They might be there, but they might be beyond casting range. They might be a couple of meters offshore.
Just a little bit more.
Switched off, with the temperature just being a little colder, they might not be feeding. They can be, the yellowtail can be extremely fussy eaters. Sometimes they'll follow you
very much
all the way. Look at it, and won't eat it. And other days,
and turn their nose up. Correct.
So it's up to the temperament of the fish itself.
They are very temperamental, Bruce. And funny enough, I thought about that the other day after I'd spoken to you when we spoke on the phone. How often, for instance, we've gone to Belompo or even Bird Island when we used to go with Malcolm Smale and guys like that in the 90s. You throw a plug today, and it wants to eat the plug. Tomorrow you go and throw the plug, as you say, it turns its nose up at the plug, and it wants a pilchard. You go there with something else the next day, and it wants that, and it doesn't want that. It's
a la carte.
incredibly temperamental. But what about the actual? I can remember reading once. I think Rudy van der Elst actually wrote the article about the yellowtail specifically, about their breeding stock a year or two prior. So if they have a bad breeding stock a year or two prior, then 2 years later we might have what we've experienced at Palompo from time to time. So what determines that breeding stock?
Yeah. So it's basically what we call in fisheries science, we call it recruitment. So it's the number of eggs that are laid, that hatch into larvae, that actually develop into small fish that enter the population in a size that start catching them. So some years you have just the right conditions. The temperatures are right, the food is right, there's plenty of prey, the fish are fat, they have a good spawning, lots of them come together, and there's a huge batch of eggs and larvae that hatch and survive and make it. And you get this, what we call, again, in fishery science, a cohort, which is a year class of young fish coming through. You can often just track that cohort through time. So there's great variability. Some years you have very poor spawning, and so you have a poor recruitment and a poor size class, but the next year much better. So you tend to get these shoals of different aged fish. That explains the question.
No, 100%. And then just going away from the yellowtail, I know when we spoke the other day, that was certainly one of the species I wanted you to talk about. So thank you for that. But the sardine run, would I be right in saying it's been a spectacular sardine run this year? Absolutely. What actually causes that? Because there's so many different theories about the sardine run.
Yeah, no, the scientists have been puzzling for years and years and years to try and understand this. And I mean, I remember asking questions when I was a young boy standing on the south coast of Natal at Pennington, sort of saying, what brings these fish here? What's going on? But, it's difficult to synthesize it in a statement, but basically the most recent research is very interesting, and it's genetic research that's been done, and it's found that the Natal sardine, the sardine that we get coming up on these annual sardine runs up into Natal waters, is actually part of the West Coast sardine population. It's a cold water fish. This animal spawns on the western Agulhas banks, so straight off Cape Point. And the larvae of those fish get taken up with the Benguela current up the west coast, where it develops and then comes back to the Agulhas bank when it's mature to spawn. But this is an offshoot of those cold west coast sardines that follow cold water inshore during winter. So there's a plug of cold water that comes inshore of the current, of the Agulhas current, that they follow. And why they're following it, we still don't really know. But obviously, it's optimum conditions. There's food for them. There's copepods that they're feeding on. And they travel northwards, mostly up as far as Durban. Sometimes they go a little bit further up as far as Tugela, but very seldom further north than Durban. And those fish are spawning. They spawn up there. So there's a great deal of spawning. But how much that spawning contributes to the greater stock, we don't know. We don't understand sort of what happened. This is what happens each year. There's another sardine stock. So it looks exactly the same, but it lives on the eastern Agulhas bank. And it lives basically on the upwelling that happens from the Agulhas, hitting the Agulhas bank and bringing up cold water and nutrients. So, and we always used to think that the Natal sardine was part of this eastern Agulhas stock, but genetic research shows that it's not. So that really threw the cat amongst the pigeons for the scientists. But it's a fascinating story. There's lots of driving as well, because there's all sorts of predators that feed on the sardines, from your shad or your elf to the garrick, to the geelbek, to the sharks, to the dolphins, the penguins, the seals, the gannets, you name it.
That's an incredible symbiosis.
So they all their biology is linked into that sort of event that happens every year. So it really is it's a fascinating migration, and it's very important to the ecology of the whole system. Just if I may, one thing that was really interesting that a couple of oceanographers discovered, and one in particular was Mike Roberts, and they found that there was almost this holding pattern that you'd see the sardines coming. They'd sort of start aggregating off PE, and then they'd see them off East London, and then they'd start getting to the Wild Coast or the Transkei Coast, and everybody's getting excited, but then they just wouldn't come. They seemed to get stopped somewhere, and they found that off an area called Waterfall Bluff, which is just north of Port St. John's.
Correct.
There's what they call a gate system, because the shelf, the continental shelf there is really, really narrow. So this cold water, it's sometimes called a countercurrent, but it's not a true countercurrent, but it's cold water moving up, flowing northwards, actually stops at that point. And north of that, you've got southward flowing warm, clean water. Sardines prefer sort of 17, 18 degree temperature.
Warmer water.
This has been warm water.
Yes.
They would get stuck there. So they used to call it a gate. And what would open the gate is when a little eddy, so a little spiraling eddy, comes off the Gullis current and moves inshore, and then starts to move north. And that would open the gate, and then boom, you'd get the whole
then
going north. And then within a few
that's
days,
where it comes about.
it would close again, you know. And so you've got these like pulses of fish moving up up into the sort of KZN waters. So it's fascinating, really, really.
And no, I've never heard of that before. So just to understand, are you saying that they sit in the cold water as they work their way up towards the tail?
Exactly.
They're going with the cold.
And then, so just in a nutshell, then, what is the reason for them beaching?
Beaching tends to be, most of the time, it's actually man's influence. So it's sardine seine netters that operate along the KZN coastline. So in most years, there's between 20 and 30. Most of them are commercial line fishermen who apply for a permit to net sardines with a seine net, and they get very excited at this time of year because they can make some extra pocket money out of selling sardines. And they'll go and use a small fast boat and set a net just behind the back line, a big beach seine, and pull it in, and that's when you get a lot of sardines on the beach. You get the sharks coming right onto the beach, and that's it does happen naturally sometimes when there is much warmer water further offshore, and they get trapped in a pocket of cooler water, and there's a lot of predation. There's a lot of sharks and dolphins and driving in, so you can have a natural beaching event. But most of what you see on TV and people getting excited is actually when the netters have gone to put a net around.
Okay.
All right.
And Bruce, this might sound silly, but you've had billions and trillions of sardines, and then they suddenly just disappear. Where do they go to?
That was what I was about to go on to.
Yes.
It's been a huge riddle. It's like, where do these things go? There's fish everywhere, and then you come to sort of August, September, and the sardines are just disappeared.
Gone. Yeah, correct.
A great biologist and a friend of mine by the name of Alan Connell worked for the CSIR for many years, and he used to go out off Rocky Bay near Park Rennie just about every weekend on his boat, and he would go and dive. Absolutely incredible man. And every time he did this, he'd anchor his boat and he'd put out a little plankton net behind the boat. So the boat would just sit on anchor, and that little plankton net just catch whatever fish eggs and larvae are drifting past. And Alan actually found that sardine eggs and larvae make up by far 60 to 70% of all the sort of fish plankton in the water column. Obviously, when they arrive in June, July, because they're spawning. But then he found another peak in October, and there's no sardines on the surface. There's nothing.
Incredible.
All these eggs and larvae coming up.
Yeah.
They've gone deep. That's where
They
they've
must.
gone.
Okay.
They've left
Yeah.
the surface and they've gone into deep water. Again,
Colder.
cooler water at the bottom. And any fisherman worth his salt who's gone out and fished for geelbek and dusky
Yes.
cob off Natal will know if they've opened them up, their stomachs are full of sardine.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So that answers the question.
So they go deep.
Yes.
Remain there, but they go deeper and probably eventually move further south. So that's
Yes.
Okay.
that's my guess. My kind of.
No, but it makes sense. It makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, they can't just, I mean, they don't disappear in the air. They've got to go somewhere. But I mean, it's, you see these massive shoals and you wonder now,
Where they're going. So they're going deep.
Well,
Now,
there you go.
just
learned
a
something.
little
Thank you.
a question
Thank you.
here. I see there's a question online. You had someone, Michelle, is it Michelle? Michelle Miller saying that the sardine, she saw a post that said the dolphins or porpoises, can't remember, were absent from the feeding this year, but nobody knew why. The dolphins. Is that true? I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. I've had a couple of colleagues who were with the sardine run. They were taking divers out off Port St. John's, parts of the Wild Coast, and the footage I've seen, certainly
Fantastic.
there were lots and lots of dolphins with them.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure that why that was, but
Yeah.
certainly the common dolphins are the most abundant dolphin species that are associated with the sardine runs, and they come up literally in their thousands every year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bottlenose dolphins, which are our local dolphin species that move up and down the coast, they also join in, obviously, but they far outnumbered by the common dolphins. Just if I may, that little thing I saw in the chat about porpoise, we don't get porpoises in South African waters. Porpoise it is a dolphin-like animal, but they have flattened spatula teeth, and they actually feed on invertebrates on the bottom. You found them up in the North Atlantic and sort of Arctic polar waters. That's where you find porpoises, but we don't get.
Okay.
It's
I don't know that.
We used to all call them porpoises in the old days, but they're not.
Yeah. And then just, you mentioned the photographs or the images you saw of this year's sardine run. In some of the pictures that I saw, and I'm sure you would have seen them, they were all over social media. It looked like great whites breaching off what looked to be Port St. John's. Would that be correct?
Yeah,
Did you see those pics?
I got sent those same pics, and I got caught too, because I looked at it and I thought, "Jeepers, that's a great white. I've never seen a great white with the sardine." But I spoke to my friend Ryan Daly, and he says, "No, Bruce, look at it carefully." So I went back, and sure enough, it was a big dusky. It was a dusky.
Oh, really? Just like a great white with a.
Just the way it was sort of turned upside down and the mouth was open. It was very misleading. But yeah, definitely a dusky.
Jeez, it looks so similar.
Whites are often there, but I think they're more interested in the animals feeding on the sardines rather than the sardines.
There was a footage the other day of in Plet of those two seals that got charred. I don't know if you saw that. Some guy walking up the beach and a seal, he came across a seal would be bitten in half, and another seal also bitten in half.
I
mean, why so many?
There's certainly an exploding population of seals on the Robberg now, and there've been a lot of great whites seen in that area, and I think they're just feeding on that seal colony.
So is that, if you recall last year, there were pictures, and in some of the pictures there were like 4 big great whites within the space of like 30 or 40 meters, close up against the side of Robberg. And I think initially it was felt by the man in the street or the layman that those 2 orcas that were predating off Mossel Bay were possibly chasing them this way.
Yeah.
Would that be a fair assessment?
It's difficult to say for sure, but the orcas that you speak about, or to the layman killer whales we call them, There
Yes.
were two individuals, I think they called them port and starboard.
Correct. Quite correct.
That were active in False Bay, and they were definitely specialists at feeding on great white sharks. They feed on the liver. So they
Yes.
kill the shark and bite out the liver because it's rich in oils and nutrients, and leave the rest of the animal. And a couple of those carcasses of the great whites were washed up on the beach. And
Yes.
some of the biologists down there started looking into this. And it wasn't only the great whites. They were also feeding on things like cow sharks and other big sharks, again taking their livers. So there's no doubt. I think there's been some work published on it now that those killer whales definitely did have an impact in kind of chasing the white sharks out of False Bay anyway for a while. There's also been a movement of the great whites from the telemetry work that I was telling you about, putting in the kind of tags into these animals. The population does seem to have moved up the east coast more. And the reason for that, I'm not sure, but certainly I think the seals on Rogberg, for example, might be one of the reasons that there's more prey around. But it's certainly yet another really interesting phenomenon that we've learned about in the last couple of years.
So are you possibly suggesting that in years to come, in the swimmers and surfers and so on in the Eastern Cape could be under a fair degree of threat?
Well, I think we've seen it. There've been more bites in the East London area and that sort of thing over the last
and
year or two. So and certainly even sort of this part of the world, Port Alfred, and
very much so.
I go out on my ski now because I feel a bit vulnerable out there. But have moved up here. There has also been a theory about the effect of the demersal shark longliners down in the Western Cape. So these are vessels that are targeting species like soupfin and smoothhound sharks, valhaia we call them in Afrikaans. And those are some of the important prey of white sharks. So one of the theories was that also because of the heavy fishing on these shark species that the white sharks aren't finding enough to eat, so they're moving sort of further east. So it could be a combination of all these factors that are coming into play.
Did you see that footage, by the way, taken at Jeffreys Bay last week by one of the surfers' brothers of that great white cruising up the point?
In the wave, it's beautiful.
It couldn't have been more than a meter away from that one surfer before turning away. And, does it not perhaps tell you that a great white is not the evil predator that people make it out to be?
No, for sure. No, I mean, it's an absolutely magnificent creature. It's it's the lion or the super predator of the sea, and it deserves nothing but respect and admiration. So, our fear of sharks is almost unexplainable. We just got this kind of unreasonable fear. I mean, you've got more chance of dying from a bee sting or a flippin' the chances are really, really, really remote. And I've spent a lot of my life underwater scuba diving. I've seen lots of sharks. I have seen white sharks underwater, and for me, it's a privilege to see an animal like that. You just sort of feel real respect to. I mean, it's scary. No.
Have you got all your limbs still? Have you still got
on the leg to shoot?
Yes, cost you an arm and a leg.
Bruce, I have this perception that maybe a Zambezi, to me, is more of a danger than a great white. Would that be a fair assessment, or is it the same as a great white? They don't always want to eat.
It can be. I sort of think of Zambies a bit like a pit bull or a staffy, like a
absolutely very much.
But
it depends how you bring them up. Depends how you.
Brought up Rottweiler.
they tend to feed in very shallow water. They come up into rivers. They can tolerate fresh water. That's where the name Zambezi shark comes from.
Okay.
Yeah.
The river.
200 kilometers up the Zambezi River, for example.
Wow.
Unbelievable.
They actually drop the Zambezi's drop their pups in big estuarine systems. So places like St. Lucia and Mzimvubu at Port St. John's. And the young Zambezi sharks use those estuarine or riverine systems to grow up in and then move out into the sea as adults. But because they feed in shallow water, they're very comfortable in dirty water, and they're kind of active, particularly early mornings and at dusk, those twilight zones. So if you're swimming in an area with dirty water at dawn or dusk, you're asking for trouble. Yeah. So that's something that's
remember this now.
Yes, I will. I'm making notes. This is actually fascinating. This stuff.
Unbelievable. Eh?
I see Stephen Murphy's given us a little question here, saying a controversial question. The oil bunkering in Algoa Bay, is it affecting the fish populations in the bay? Have you had a look at that?
I haven't had a look at it, and it's not something that I know a lot about. But I must admit, I drove past Kucha the other day, just from the highway, and I just couldn't believe the number of
amount of boats
anchored in the bay. And
unbelievable.
I hate it. I think it's ridiculous. They're just sitting off our coast and polluting without coming in, without paying taxes, without.
It's the side of a port that doesn't work, surely.
Yeah.
I mean, for those ships to be sitting there, they're over 20 at the moment.
Well, it's the same. It's the same off Durban, and I mean, I believe Transnet has just outsourced a Philippines company to take over the Pier 3 with the cargo handling, because they just can't manage. So yes, I think there are problems with the system.
It's a port problem.
Bunkering.
Dealing with the cargo, but in terms of the bunkering, the fuels that they're using are oils. They heavy diesel.
It's heavy fuel, yeah.
That type of stuff tends to float on the surface of the water. And where we're seeing, I think, and what worries me the greatest is the impacts on the birds, particularly the penguins. Where the numbers are sort of decreasing dramatically. And, in our lifetimes, in the next 20 to 30 years, we could very well see the extinction of the African penguin, which is only found on the tip of South Africa. So that would be our fault and our responsibility. So it's something that I think that we need to really look at carefully and try and ensure that we minimize these kind of environmental impacts, particularly in sensitive areas like the Algoa Bay. On the other side of that, I recently edited the tagging newsletter. You spoke about it a little bit earlier.
Yes.
We've got our
1998
edition 2023, hot off the press. And in it, we've got an article written by a PhD student, Vivian Damas, who I think works in a tackle shop somewhere in PE at times as well.
Oh, really?
Okay. Her PhD looking at the fish populations in Kucha Harbour. And they've been doing some tag and release fish monitoring there for a couple of years now, since the mid sort of 2000s. And it's quite incredible what the fish populations in that harbour are. Obviously, you and I, average recreational fishermen, are not allowed to fish in there because it's prohibited. It's a security area. But they've allowed this team of citizen scientists to fish there, and they've caught an amazing number of species. And Vivian is now also using underwater cameras. It's something called a baited remote underwater video.
Yes, I know of them.
Contraption with two little GoPros on it that they put down in the water with a bait arm and a kilogram of chopped up sardine in a little PVC container, and it attracts fish to it. And she's doing that with the fishing stuff, and it's quite incredible. So this is almost like equivalent to a big artificial reef, because they've built these massive big piers with dolosa and lots of concrete. So you've got, whereas before it was just a sandy beach shore. So you've got those systems now where there's a whole new ecosystem that's developed and lots of fish that are living there. But I think if you look at it, if you fly over Kucha and you look at those arms of those piers going out into the sea, I think that's like a huge big fish trap. Any fish, think of a garrick or a leary, or a shad, or a dusky shark that, you know, traditionally swim parallel to the coast, going along the coast. He hits into that wall, he kind of goes in, you know, and he's
correct. No, absolutely
around in the harbor. So it's an amazing design. But
you know,
what does happen there is the water is quite a lot warmer in Kucha Harbor than outside, especially after an upwelling system. So it's acting as a kind of almost a thermal refuge for some species, that they'll go in there to keep warm, and when the water warms up outside, then they move out again. So very interesting.
Okay.
Absolutely. And you know, not indifferent to many years ago when the old power station at Swartkops used to work. They called it the warm water spread. And I've seen photographs in old heralds and so on, dating back to the 60s, with a guy standing with nice big kingfish, you know, proper GTs, caught in the Swartkops River, obviously attracted by the warm water coming out of the power station. But obviously that doesn't work anymore, so you don't get those.
Okay, there's Maz.
Oh, Murray!
Says, Dr. Bruce, please can you speak about some of the variables that affect the bite? Steenbras and cracker. He wants to know what to use.
I was going to ask you a question for him because he's trying so hard.
Listen, if I knew the answer to that, I don't think I'd tell you on this program.
I'll tell you what it leads to. We as I mentioned to you on the phone, we are specifically, our son is certainly targeting Steenbras at the moment. And he's put in lots of hours, and he's caught a big cracker over a sand bottom whilst fishing for Steenbras. And from our experiences dating back to the 80s, we always caught the big Steenbras on a pumping west when the water in the bay had gone a little bit cold and a little bit dirtier, more sort of chocolatey, and on maybe 16 degree water. I never tapped the barometer, but I assumed because the big westerly had come through, the atmospheric pressure had was quite low. So what is your theory on the best time to catch a Steenbras? I think that's what he's really asking.
You're asking the wrong person, because I'm a Natal boy, so I've spent my whole life in Natal in the warm water. I don't really know the tricks about white Steenbras and what makes them spin, but just in the last couple of months being down here and fishing on the coast in Claremont, I've realized that is a fish that doesn't spook for cold water as much as the others. You know, so we get a lot of bronze bream, or the locals call them bluefish here in the eastern Cape. And that fish, when the water gets colder than 17 degrees, it just shuts off. You know, it won't feed.
Correct.
You won't get a bite. But the Steenbras, he will eat in cold water, even 15 degrees. He'll still eat.
100% right. Quite correct.
And I don't know why that is, but obviously that fish is adapted to the colder water. And when I've learned the tricks, you can call me on the next program and we can discuss them a little bit more. But yes, I must say, if you just flip and go onto YouTube and scrum around a bit, there is so much information available now to learn. I mean, I haven't used things like sand prawn much as bait and octopus and things like that. You know, we use other stuff in Natal. We use mackerel and red eyes. And
correct.
I just go onto YouTube and flipping, next minute I've got like 3 or 4 videos explaining this bait and that bait and the next
Yes.
one and when to use them. And so there is a mountain of information there, you know, to kind of help you.
You obviously love fishing as well. I mean, do your sports fishing, is it, do you still do your sports fishing as well?
No, I got into, I was just one of those very lucky people that sort of, I had a silver spoon stuck in my mouth when I was born, I think. And I love fishing. I've been fishing since I was 4 years old. And yeah, I started off on bass and red-tailed minnows in the freshwater in Zululand. And then my grandfather had a cottage down in Pennington on the south coast. So it started off with pinkies when I was 5 or 6, and then streepies or quarantine, and then
the normal progression.
Grew up that whole thing, and I went to school in Moore River in sort of the colder part of Natal, and we had 5 kilometers of Moore River frontage on the farm at Western. So every weekend I was catching smallmouth bass, and I learned to catch trout and, you know, the freshwater species. So, but yeah, it's through an absolute fascination and love for fish that I went into the field of ichthyology and studied them at Rhodes University. I did my master's on blacktail and zebra. So those 2 species, and that was in the Tsitsikama National Park down in Storms River.
Okay, yes, beautiful area.
We haven't spoken about tonight, but it's one of my real passions is what we call marine protected areas or marine reserves, where we kind of try and look after some of our more resident fish species along the coast. But yeah, anyway.
How do you guys do that? I mean, how are you involved there? I mean, it seems like it's especially with the sea, it's just so vast. Everything's just so far apart. It's like border protection. How do you actually do it? You know?
Yeah, we were chatting before the program started, and we were just talking about how you were saying that your parents, I think it were just
there's no limits.
Never fish out the sea. I mean, it's so vast,
never.
It's so big, and as we've learned sort of more and more about the ocean, we've realized that a lot of the species, the biodiversity, the richness in animal and plant life is actually found right up against the coastline. It's close and shore. It's on the continental shelf where the water is shallow and the light can penetrate into the ocean.
Yes.
If you go hundreds of miles offshore, it's pretty much like the Sahara. It's like it's a big desert. Certainly there are plankton and animals living there, but it's nothing like the productivity of the coastal area. So because of that, a lot of the species that we're talking about tonight, steenbras, musselcracker, yellowtail, etc., all live on the continental shelf. They live up relatively close to the landmass. And in South Africa, certainly on the east coast, our continental shelf is very narrow. St. John's, for example, you go 7 kilometers offshore and you're in 200 meters of water. You go off the edge of the shelf. Whereas on the Alice Banks, off Struisbaai, you can go 200 kilometers offshore before you get to that sort of depth of water.
Wow.
So because of the sort of area of our continental shelf, it determines where a lot of the different species are found. And so this is something that we've been looking at for a number of years. And when you think about our terrestrial landscape in South Africa, if you think about Kruger National Park, you think about the Drakensberg, you think about Table Mountain and the Fynbos, you think about Orange River mouth and Springbok and the dry Fluctus and the Karoo succulent biome. You know, our whole country has got very different biodiversity, and we've realized because of farming, because of grazing, because of degradation of the environment, we've had to put in protected areas. I'm talking about game reserves, where we protect examples of these different biomes, of these different ecosystems, so that we can look after the plants and animals that live there. And in exactly the same way, we've tried to do that in the sea. So if you think about Cozy Bay or Sodwana Bay, think about the water up there. It's warm, it's clean, it's got corals, it's got a multitude of different tropical fish species. You come down to Cape Point, it's cold, you've got kelp, and you've got big biomasses of a few species. So you've got sardines, you've got hake, and so on. So our big commercial fisheries are largely based down in the Cape, and we've got small little fisheries up in KZN, because although we've got lots of diversity up there, we don't have the stock or the biomass to sustain that type of fishing. If we want to look after those fish and those marine organisms around our coast, we actually need a network of protected areas from the north up at Cozy, going
they can work together
to the west coast. And that's what we've actually done. We have now, I think it is 42 marine protected areas in South Africa. The biggest one is off the Prince Edward Islands down in the Southern Ocean. That's a massive one. But then the others are all in our what we call our EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone, which is a zone extending out 200 nautical miles from the shore out to sea. And that goes right around South Africa, and that belongs to South Africa. That's our water. We are responsible for any resources
national waters
belong to South Africa. So if a foreign nation comes into our EEZ, we can tell them to get out. It's not theirs, it's ours. And we've got to look after it. So to look
I suppose the difference is in the game farms and those things. A lot of stuff is private land, whereas the sea is always government, I suppose. So it's always going to be a political game, I would imagine.
So what we've had in the last 10, 20 years is a lot of interest in oil and gas. So we've had big companies coming up, buying up huge swaths of seabed that they want to go and look for oil and gas in it. And hot on the heels of that is now deep sea mining, because we know that there are rare elements like lithium, for example, for our solar batteries, for phosphorus, which is a commodity really important to our fertilizers that we battle to get enough of. So those deep metals are sitting in the sea. So we've got big hungry companies wanting to go mine those deep sea minerals. But the devastation that causes is absolutely phenomenal, and it has massive environmental impacts. So that's sort of part of the sort of reason why we've had to speed up our identifying where are our best areas of marine biodiversity, and how can we protect them so that we look after the fish and the marine organisms that we've got in Southern Africa. So it's a lot of work, and I think as South Africans we can be really proud of what we've achieved. We hot on the heels of countries like Australia and New Zealand, United States, Canada.
So we've done that.
We have achieved now 5% of our EEZ falls into marine protected areas, which is a lot better than many other countries around the world that own parts of the sea. But the targets that were set for 2020 was to try and achieve 10% protection of our EEZ. So we got halfway there by 2020. We had a whole lot of new MPAs proclaimed in 2019. But the science that's being done is saying that 10% is not enough. We actually need 30%. We've got to look at 30% protection. So
to answer your mom's question. There you go. Was it your mom?
No, she.
You just answered his mom.
No, my mom's long gone, but she used to tell me, Dad, what are these? Lots of fish. I'm like, no, I don't know about that anymore.
And this, just before we conclude, just tell us a little bit about the long line fishing, because my perception of that, and I think the general perception to the man in the street again, is that it cannot be good for our fish stocks.
So to explain long line fishing, there are basically two different types. There's pelagic longline fishing, which is when you're fishing in the water column from the surface, but not on the bottom. And then you've
Yes.
got demersal longline fishing, where you're letting the line all the way down to the bottom, and you're fishing on the bottom, so to speak. So we have both in South Africa. We have both pelagic and demersal longline fisheries. The demersal longline fisheries, the one that fish on the bottom, tend to use much shorter lines because they don't want them to get stuck on the bottom.
Yes, tangles.
Yeah, which makes sense.
And we have basically two types. We have one that targets hake and kingclip. So they bottom fish, but they can fish on rougher ground than the ground that the trawlers trawl. You know, you can't pull a big trawl net over high profile reef because it gets jammed there and you lose all your gear, which is going to cost you hundreds of thousands of bucks. So that's where they use the demersal longline. Then we spoke about it earlier. We have the demersal shark longline fishery, which is targeting those hound sharks and smooth hounds inshore. So that's quite a small fishery. I think there are only 4 vessels that are currently fishing in it. Then the pelagic longline fishery is much bigger. These are the vessels that you see spoken about around the world that are setting lines that are 80 to 100 kilometers long.
Yeah.
Literally, the
100 kilometers long.
80 kilometers, and on that long line are up to 10,000 hooks that are set. So it's a huge, big industry system. They've got a massive, big winch of rope on the boat. And they have like 4 or 5 crew members as they set the long line. It's got a buoy, and every couple of 100 meters there's another buoy goes out. And as the hooks come past, they put a whole squid on it, or they put a whole mackerel on it. Most of them have got a loomy stick. So a lot of the long line fishing for swordfish, for example, is done at night because the swordfish come up to the surface to feed at night.
Yes.
And that sort of gets them. So that's the type of scale. So I've read somewhere, if you took all the long lines that were laid around the world, you could wrap the world 40 times. That's the sort of length of long lines. There are literally...
That answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thousands of kilometers of long line fishing.
Yeah.
And they've obviously had a massive, massive impact on our marine biodiversity. Where we've seen it the most is in our shark species. So sharks are generally slower growing. They produce far fewer offspring than a bony fish, which lays, thousands, sometimes millions of eggs. Sharks give birth often to live young, and it gives birth to 3 or 4 pups. So they're much more susceptible to overfishing. So things like mako sharks that are found out in the open ocean have really been hammered. Pork beagles, those in the sort of northern hemisphere are others. So their targets of pelagic longline fishing tend to mostly be your tunas. So I'm thinking yellowfin, big eye, those kind of species, and swordfish. Yeah. So those are the sort of big species that they target. And they have had tremendous impact. Fortunately for us, species like tuna we were talking about yellowtail earlier. It's another one of those highly migratory, very, very, very fast growing nomadic species that are found sort of across big swaths of ocean. So they are resilient to fishing pressure. And even though we've got so much pressure going on, the stocks are still managing to tick over. But I think in the Indian Ocean now, most of the tuna species are considered to be overfished. They actually take more than those populations can sustain. Right. But hopefully that answers your question.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, Gino used to be involved. Well, we were both involved in different ways with the Tuna Classic, and there were many years, or some years certainly, where very little tuna were caught over a period of 3 or 4 days. And that came after massive catches of tuna. So you had periods of, I can remember maybe 3 or 4 years in a row where hardly a tuna was caught. Yeah. And I think the one particular tournament, there were 2 tuna caught that were this big over a period of 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. But it's like also that those, obviously you got to watch out for those specific, like you said, the mussel crackers that live to 45 years old. That you catch one and you're really taking out the equivalent of like millions of tuna. You know, it's like or sardines. You know, it's like the sardines can handle it, but these other fish, certain species, especially. So I mean, going to restaurants, people can at least, you know, you got those that list of fish. Fish that you shouldn't be buying, you know.
Yeah, we've got a question here. I beg your pardon. Sorry, carry on there, Bruce. I beg your pardon.
No,
Sorry.
I was just going to mention that it's called SASSI, the South African Sustainable Seafood Initiative.
That's the one
run by WWF South Africa.
Okay.
And yeah, I think it's been quite effective at improving consumer awareness about fish.
Yeah.
So they use the robot method of green, orange, and red. So species that are harvested sustainably, that the stocks are in a good state, that would be a wise choice for a consumer, whether you're at a fish market or whether you sit in the restaurant looking at the menu. You know, if you buy dorado, or if you buy yellowtail, or if you buy tuna, which is a fast-growing species that's sustainably harvested, that's a good one to take. But if you look at, you know, sort of red steenbok or black mussel cracker, or, you know, one of these very slow-growing, highly overexploited species, that wouldn't be such a good choice.
Yeah,
so it's been
better not to.
A useful way, and that really, the idea of it is to actually impact on the commercial fishery itself. So you know, if he can't sell those really slow-growing, long-lived resident fish because no one's going to buy them because they're red listed, he's actually going to change his targeting, and he's going to go and try and catch something else that is more kind of thing, which is in simplicity, in a simple way, the kind of idea of the program. So
No, absolutely, it makes perfect sense.
Now listen, Gary's got questions that he brings on here every other. I see he's obviously looking for grunter.
It's from Gary's grunter fishing days in the SWAT.
Do you know anything about grunter feeding patterns? And when the shoal is tailing and blowing prawns, so that's blow prawns, right? I remember Chad Alcock talking about this as well. But not blowing prawns, but not taking the bait. What causes that? Have there been any studies on that? Have there been any studies? Grunter.
You're talking to the wrong person. If you had somebody like Paul Cowley in my place tonight, he would tell you all you need to know about grunter, because he studied it for years and years, and he knows them backwards. But certainly you do see them tailing, and when they are tailing, when they're standing on the heads, they are blowing jets of water into the burrows, trying to loosen up the sand prawn. But they're very focused. They're focused on that prawn. So to catch them, your bait has to really look like a prawn that's just been blown out of the burrow. If it's you've got a piece of sardine wrapped up with cotton lying there, it's not going to look like But
I remember Chad Alcock
hook through the tail with light tackle and a small hook, and is gently flicked where the grunt are tailing, then you're in the game.
Very good, Gary. I think Chad Alcock is saying that they actually the prawns actually get, because I mean it's like, you know, it's all evolution. You know what I mean? The prawns they stay very quiet and they don't make any, because if they click, then the grunter hear them as well. So these prawns are like, they try and stay quiet and then they float away, you know. But then if they start to click, then the grunter look up and they grab them, because they can't check in the sun, you see. So they've got to hear where they.
That's a proper fisherman story.
Bruce, I wanted to ask you
for a couple of hours.
The mahogany reef. I wanted to ask you, from a scientific point of view, and specifically looking at the species we've discussed, like the popular fish that the guys target, which ones are other than the black steenbras and the red steenbras and those slow-growing fish, what species are in real trouble at the moment?
Okay, I've just been doing a whole lot of what we call IUCN red listing. So you've probably heard of the red list. So if species
I
get
have, yes.
into the red list, they kind of in trouble. So we've done
Yeah.
the same for a number of our fish species, and we try and assess the stock status and then come up with a category of how.
I know that. Sorry, I know that list very well. I'm on my wife's red list often, but I know exactly what you're telling me.
Yeah, we have a couple of species, and the ones that I can talk about with familiarity are what we call the sparrows or the sea breams, because
Yes.
South Africa actually has a large number. In fact, the greatest number of sparrows than anywhere else in the world. We have 42 species. So we've been talking about a lot of them tonight: red steenbras, black mussel,
Yes.
white steenbras, blacktail, you name it. A lot of our fish belong to that family.
Are those all endemic to these waters?
They are endemic. They are found nowhere else in the world. So those fish are
That adds to the problem.
Our responsibility. So a lot of the sparrows are characterized by very slow growth. So they grow slowly. They take a long time before they reach maturity. Some of them 7, 8, 9 years before they actually start spawning.
Breeding.
For over 40 to 50 years. So black mussel cracker, we've aged to 45. Red steenbras recently, we thought that they got to about 35, but we've used some carbon dating type technology, and we've realized that they get to over 50. I think 55 is they live for a hell of a long time. And those are some of the species that are off the South African coast in the worst state.
Okay.
Red steenbras and dageraad are the two that are really, really have been hammered. They also, in addition to the slow growth, they have other life history characteristics that make them vulnerable to fishing. Some of them aggregate when they spawn. Some of them are very aggressive feeders. So they're the first ones to arrive at the bait. So they're the first ones to get removed out of the population.
Good.
And if you think that we've been fishing our reefs off the South African coast for the past 150 years, a lot of those species have been really, really hammered. And they take a long time to recover. If you go into a forest and you cut all the yellowwood, the big old yellowwood trees, it takes a long time for those things
to get back again.
So these are some of the examples, but there are others that are not in the sparrows. That one in particular that comes to mind that I'm very worried about is dusky cob or kabeljou.
Yes.
We didn't
You've
realize.
got 2 species, haven't you?
We've got 3, actually 4.
3.
But we didn't realize this for up until the sort of mid-1990s when a great guy, he was a student with me at Rhodes University, Mark Griffiths, actually did his PhD degree on cob. Studying the cob, he realized that we have these different species. They were all named scientifically Agarosomys hololepidotus. It was all recognized scientifically as one species until Mark came along and said, no. Up in Natal, you've got dusky cob and you've got square-tailed cob. From East London southwards, you've got dusky cob inshore and you've got silver cob offshore. And on the west coast, you've got silver cob. And if you go up into Namibia, you've got in the northern parts of Namibia, you've got the west coast dusky cob, which is a 4th species. So we've got these 4 different species, but the one that they're all in trouble, basically. They've all really, really kind of in dwang. But the dusky cob is an estuarine dependent species. So it needs to have an estuary in part of its life history. Most importantly, the early part. So when they are juveniles, these cob will use estuaries as a nursery area. And once they reach sub-adulthood or sort of maturity, then they start to move out into the surf zone and then into deeper water. But if you think about the condition of a lot of our estuaries along the South African coast, particularly where I'm from in KZN, our estuaries are in shocking state. They're
Correct.
full of sediment. They're full of pollution. So any species that needs an estuary as a nursery area has got an automatic bottleneck in its population. And
very much so. Swartkops, great example.
Overfishing, they're battling to get their life cycle to kind of function. The dusky cob, we estimate now, is down to between 1% and 4% of its pristine state. Before man started fishing dusky cob, if you came to South Africa 200 years ago, there was
100%.
that amount of cob here. We've got 1% to 2% of that left. These fish grow really slowly. They also live up to over 40 years of age. So those big old Java cob, those big rietbulle they used to call them in the old days. That's a fish of over 40 kilos. We think that a lot of them migrate up into KZN waters to spawn. So every year, starting at about this time of year, July, August, September, we get aggregations of big adult dusky cob on reef pinnacles and wrecks off the Durban, South Coast, North Coast area. The fishermen have all learnt where those reef marks are. They've all got GPSs. They specifically go out there at night to target them. They know exactly where they are, what time of year. And those are spawning aggregations. Those fish are all spawning. So it's like killing the golden goose. This is the fish that are going to drive the next year's recruitment and bring in the new small fish. And we catch
it's sad. It's sad, Bruce. And at the end of the day,
every step that this dusky cob has in its life cycle makes it really vulnerable to fishing. So it's a fish. For me now, I love catching cob. I mean, chocker blob and dusky cob are like, whoa, this is, and you can read the water. And I'm starting to learn to fish with a paddle tail now. And I'm trying to look for the sand with a little drop off and a little puff of dirty water and put the paddle tail in there. 1, 2 winds, boom. And you feel on the brain. And I'm starting to talk like a fisherman now.
Very much.
I can't kill those fish because I know that they're in deep trouble. So
of course,
that fish as well as I can. And for your listeners today, we can all learn a great deal about how to handle our fish. I mean, a lot of us are starting to catch and release now. It's becoming
much better,
more and more accepted.
Great point.
Competitions are doing more and more catch and release fishing, but it's no good releasing a fish that's going to die. We've got to do as much as we can to ensure that fish survives so that it can go on and spawn or whatever. The most important thing that I want to get through tonight to your listeners is it's all about air exposure. It's the amount of time when you catch a fish that you take it out of the water. That's killing it. It's like
correct.
It's like
it's like taking us out of the atmosphere.
It's like me running 400 meters. I couldn't do it anymore. But if I sprinted 400 meters and you said, "Hello, Bruce," okay, boom, you put my head under the water, and then you said, "How are you doing?" Boom, back.
Correct.
Absolutely. No, you're quite right.
When you hook a fish and you're fighting a fish on a line, it's fighting for its life. Its heart is pumping double time. It's got all sorts of stress hormones running around in its blood, and it's it's really in a tough state. So when you land that fish, you want to make sure that you as kind to that fish as possible. Number one is keep it in the water. If you have to remove it, to measure it, to take the hook out, be quick. No more than 30 seconds back into the water. So a lot of fishermen on the shore now are fishing with a big bucket that they keep next to them full of fresh seawater. Or if you're on a low tide and you've got nice rock pools, straight into the rock pool. What you have to do if you're tagging, if you're just wanting to take a photo of the fish, take a photo and then back into the water. As little handling with your hands as possible, and don't put it onto dry, rough surfaces. Don't put it on hot sand or onto a hot rock. Use scales and hurt itself. Now those are obvious, simple things, but I think we can all learn to handle our fish better and release them
Correct.
back shore. Another thing
No, it's such a valid point. And sadly, people don't. They might know this or they might hear this, but they don't adhere to it, especially if it's a size fish, because it's that ego that comes into play. I want to go and show my mates. And that's the sad reality of it.
Yeah, but we can do that. You can stroke the ego, but do it in a rock pool. Sort of roll
absolutely. Absolutely.
Get your mugshot, get your kind of bragging rights,
yes.
But look after that fish.
So just educating people like this,
Yeah, I'm doing a lot now is because I've worked in marine protected areas for many years where I've been monitoring the fish stocks. So I'm one of those few people that's allowed to go and fish in the area where nobody else is. And that's why I'm not a very good fisherman, because I've been spoiled.
Do you want a gilly?
Is every fish we catch gets handled with like baby gloves, and it
correct.
goes back. So one of the things that we do, and it really makes a huge difference, is we crimp the barbs on our hooks.
That's right.
Pair of point nose pliers, and you just squash that barb. And I promise you, I've been fishing with barbless hooks for 30 years now, and even now on the coast, when I'm going to go and catch a bronze bream or a blacktail for supper, I still use a barbless hook, because I know I'm going to catch the odd shark or the odd this or that. That hook just comes out so easily.
Comes out easy.
If it is swallowed down into the throat, you just cut the line, and as soon as the tension on that line is reduced, that fish can actually spit it out itself. So it's a great idea, and it's a better way to fish. And I promise you don't use fish on a barb. In fact, you hook it later, because that barb causes a bit of a restriction to the point you go in. When it's patterned, the hook's in quickly. And I fish a lot with circle hooks, because circle hooks tend to be a lot kinder to the fish, because they tend to get caught, what we call in the scissors. You hook it in the side of the jaw. Much better than hooking it in the throat or the palate or elsewhere. And it's so easy just to whip out that hook. So
barbless.
Catch and release.
Fantastic. And I saw a lot of that. I had the privilege of going to Tsitsikamma with Paul Cowley and his guys from Saiba in about 2005. And I'm sure, like you experienced, it's like running a comrades marathon before you actually get a line in the water, going up and down these cliffs and hanging on to little twigs to get yourself up. But what a fantastic experience. And it taught me a hell of a lot as a fisherman.
That's what people know about fishing. I would gather. It's absolutely incredible.
But that's where I saw the respect they had for the fish and how well they treated that fish. And they tagged literally, I'd be guessing, but I would say well over 30 or 40 fish on that particular excursion. And barbless hooks as well.
There's a league now called RASPL, Rock and Surf Super Pro League, that quite a few of the guys are, and they've really done well. Warren Potts is sort of one of the scientists in that, and they've done a lot of research on the fish that are being caught, and they've done so well at improving the handling of their fish and getting them back. And I promise you, it's making a difference. Particularly with some of these big, long-lived fish. You're seeing things like some of our shark species, some of the cob that have been tagged are being recaptured multiple times. So those animals are actually surviving. So we know that it does work.
Oh man, this has been absolutely fascinating.
Thank you so much.
Just a couple of questions before we leave you. It's Mark Banks to say, you went to Fishy Dishy the other day for lunch. Catch of the day was hepatitis.
He's a comedian.
Oh, Mark, you're nuts. And I see Brian Saraya's online as well. He says, I'm sure Bruce was at Rhodes when Prof. Mike Bruton and Prof. Skelton were there.
Yes, I was.
There you go. Zara, hey, my boy. Brian Saraya, good man.
Oh, fantastic. But thank you so much, Bruce, for coming on.
Thank you, Bruce.
It's been fantastic, and I can't believe that the wealth of knowledge is phenomenal. Thank you so much for coming in. I'll see there's such a dog in the background saying I'm hungry. Or is that a fish?
When I'm next at Claremont, we've got friends there. I'll come and look you up if you don't mind.
There we go.
A cup of tea.
You bet. Be nice to meet
You
you.
have some tears.
Yes. Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you for your time.
Thank
All
you,
the best.
Bruce. And,
Bruce.
okay, that's goodbye to Bruce, man. What an absolutely amazing guy.
Lovely, okay.
Fires, thank you so
Lovely,
much.
okay.
Thank you to our sponsors, to Spa for sponsoring our show, and to Fitchin Leeds. And we're going to see you again next Monday. I think we got next Monday. Don't forget the show coming, 3rd, 4th, 5th of August at the Hellenic.
Monday is Big John.
Big John on Monday. Big John also fishing.
Okay.
We got a fishing extravaganza. So anyone's interested in fishing. We'll see you on Tuesday. Fantastic. We've got our show coming up. Don't forget Fernando's thing on Saturday if you're interested in the motorbikes. Thanks to Fitchin Leeds. Thank you to Spa.
And thank you to Bruce.
And thank you to Bruce for coming on. And we'll see you next week, Monday.
Thank you.
Relax, sit down. Coming out of PE town. Drink, find a shot. Never mind your liver. Get to Gino's spot.
Gino's spot.
Get to Gino's spot.
Gino's spot.
Have a laugh, have a giggle, and exercise your middle. Have a Gino shot.